I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, in this rebuttals, I will bring you 3 things. Why is the principle itself of government side is wrong, and why it is not necessary, and also why is this a mismatch problem. So first of all, the principle that proposition side has brought up is social contract. Now, social contract stops in the section where whether government has an obligation or not towards society or its people. And this is very important, the execution itself of the obligation will be done by the government regardless of the political competency test being done or not. And why is this not necessary to begin with? So the thesis of our rebuttals is that quality assurance does not happen before the candidacy, but after the government or political candidates have made it into the office and have made these policies. Then we re-evaluate and supervise these policies that they make, which we already have one legislative, jurisdictive, and other bodies that creates check and balances between the others. 2, we open a democratic platform, and it is unclear in the government side whether democracy still works or not, and whether is there still access for people to voice their differences or not. And 3, the competency test will only result, and which I will strengthen in my argument, by the way, a candidate or politicians will make politicians or candidates harder to criticize because they have an objective claim that they are the smartest at politics in the nation. Now, the last rebuttals is a better participation is a mismatch problem analysis. Yes, people are nihilistic, but the problem is not the selection or the candidacy process, but the actual problem is that why does people not trust the government? So people does not trust the government itself to begin with, because governments are more focused on making short-term policies without thinking about the long-term effect. And if you look closely, proposition side did not explain why these candidates that will pass the competency test will not make a short-term policy, and they did not explain the link between passing these tests with making a good policy, and why would people itself would accept the policy. And the reason in both of our worlds why is the policy making system short-termist is because these people are only in the office for 5 years. Now, as opposition side, I will bring forth 2 arguments, and first one is collectivism and representation in democracy. What I mean by collectivism is that the process of policy making is not individualistic, it is a collective effort. Now, what does this have to do with the political competency test to begin with? Now, 2 things here. First, the competency test will make candidates individualistic because the test itself is individualistic, and the responsibility that falls on their shoulder is also individualistic, because not only do they know more than others due to the merit being placed, making policy itself becomes a selfish tendency. Why? Because of 2 things. The first one is selfishness. Because the ranking shows that they are the smartest, then they will have a tendency to be more individualistic and confident in what they do. That can occur to them that they do not need another perspective other than theirs, and that will make the policy making process individualistic. Second one is responsibility. Because they are the smartest, then the feeling that the responsibility will fall on their shoulders to make these policies. That is why it will become a selfish tendency that they must make it themselves, and it must work, and if it fails, then it is therefore their fault alone. Now, this brings huge pressure from the spotlight created by the merit, but in our world, our candidates get chosen by society not because they are the smartest, the strongest, or better than anybody else, but because society themselves think that they need this particular person's perspective to join with others' perspective to finally solve our problem. So this will make these people not have a bigger ego than they need. Now, the second one, why is individualistic itself is bad, and most often than not because most often than not the problem in the nation itself is not a scientific problem. It is a multi-layered and sectoral issue. So to solve this problem, the candidate must also bring outside help to have a larger perspective from different places. So not only that, the theocratic methods to a policy. What I mean by theocratic methods is that the methods that is very scientific and objective. Because in a broader spectrum, the government must often than not, they must build a policy that is not scientifically and objectively going to benefit them, but they must build a policy that can harm them, such as subsidies, for example, where of course it is not the fault of the government that the people is poor, but then why do we need to help them? Because this proves that policy making process must not use these theocratic methods and must be done for a broader spectrum of perspectives. Now, moving on to my second argument, that is the candidacy is a fundamental right that every person deserves. To clarify, proposition team claims that they are not limiting access, but this policy or competency test or this merit is actively limiting the access. Not to mention that the proposition teams also tells you that they must have a professional experience in certain fields such as healthcare and etc. Now this makes people who want to try to go up and represent their people, the minority. This will make it a lot harder because they must go through a few qualifications to actually be able to run themselves up for candidacy, and this limits the fundamental right that every person deserves, and that is to try and get their voices out. And to all of the other principles that proposition team have said is secondary. The main principle is that a candidate is the chance of being a candidate is alright to be given to everyone, just like voting rights. So putting a limiter on the right to candidates is against the very essence of democracy itself, and that is why we are so proud to oppose.